Good morning, DawgNation. I'm Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger. Hello to you, First and 15, DawgNation.com, DawgNation app, and I guess we're also today on Facebook and YouTube. We are, to be completely honest with you, distributing the show in a slightly different way today, and so I don't know that we necessarily meant to fire on the other platforms here at the same time, but obviously we've had some technical issues in terms of the quality of the stream, the consistency of the stream, I guess. And so we're distributing in a different way today, which I don't understand it well enough to explain it to you, and I'm assuming you think that's probably boring anyway. So the bottom line, the summation of all that is that we are working to correct what's obviously been a pretty frustrating issue that many of you have expressed some concern about, and so we are, as I promised you we would, working on that behind the scenes. So with that said, we will dive in here, get your comments via First and 15, DawgNation.com, DawgNation app. Hope you're all getting ready for a fun weekend. I think it's going to be a fun weekend around Georgia football here this weekend. Obviously, the scrimmage on Saturday, we had Mike Bobo talking about that yesterday. Some of you, the well-heeled among us, the wealthy folks among us, may get a chance to be a part of that. You know, a lot of boosters will be invited, and so the rumor mill will be pretty kind of hot and heavy on some of this. So that'll be cool. On our show today, it's Jake Fromm before we're done. Jake's actually got a big night tonight. Washington Commanders football against the Cleveland Browns in NFL preseason action. The Falcons, I think, play tonight too against Miami. So preseason football is kind of back. That's kind of a cool thing. I'll see you tomorrow, Peachtree TV. We're doing the Sheriff's Cup. Kind of a fun event. Last year it was exclusively with the GFL, with the Gwinnett Football League, and this year we're kind of expanding that out to Cobb and Fulton. And DeKalb County is also kind of a part of that there as well. They're sending championship teams. So that's kind of a fun thing. Kind of the football, I guess, young football players here. It's kind of like it's sort of like the youth football version of the Little League World Series. We're going to do that on TV, Peachtree TV tomorrow. And that's all a precursor to next week when we've got just a million wall-to-wall high school football games. I have been working a lot this week, talking to a lot of the coaches for games that we'll have on Peachtree TV for our Corky Kale Dave Hunter Classic next week. So that is a lot of fun. So that's enough of me. Let me talk to you here for right now. Will Dickerson, as he so frequently does. It's time to be the Alpha Dogs. Checking in from Trenton, Georgia. Will, we're glad to see you. Brian Whitehead says 22 days until kickoff, so go for 2 and 22. That was a reminder from a year ago. We're now 22 days out from the chance to go for 3 in 23. By the way, we've got some fun stuff coming for you guys on all of that here in a little bit there too. BMAC says last year the offense averaged 501 yards a game. Will they be able to increase or possibly see a decrease in that number? I think that's a really fair question. We've said that this week, that it's fine to say, hey, while I think that Mike Bobo was a good hire, the comfort that Kirby Smart has with him is a good thing. While you say all of that, at the same time, it is okay to say, and there is a very high standard to achieve. Now, the number we get pointed to there is the total number of yards per game. That's probably less interesting to me than a few other things. 98 plays last year of 20 or more yards. Like, that's a very big deal. Very big deal. And coming close to matching that, I think probably, makes some sense. When you look at, the points scored in postseason games a year ago, 50, 40 plus, 65. That's a high bar to measure. So whatever number you pick out to say, hey, this is the measuring stick, be it yards per game or points scored in the games that matter most, or the number of explosive plays, whatever you kind of choose to look at and use right there. The truth is, it is a high bar and one to very much keep in mind. Steve Waters, who checks in down there from the Gulf Shore, says, I believe the Bobo is going to make a lot of doubters believe again. He's going to be, he's going to wow with the overall level of talent that Georgia has. Steve, that's a strong comment. Thomas T-Bone 86, I did get to see some of the Braves yesterday afternoon. Obviously, look, they've got some pitching issues right now, and the series in Pittsburgh does not go the way you want. They've got a 4-game set coming up in New York as they're playing a doubleheader on Saturday. And, I get the idea that you don't want to tax the bullpen too much. I do get that. And ultimately, obviously, the overall concern for Atlanta is not too high right now. This is still, I think, the best team in baseball. Obviously, by record, they are clearly achieving at an incredibly high level here right now. And that's all true. And at the same time, you are reminded of, this team is not going to pitch its way to a World Series title right now. It's just not. But can you get enough? I don't know that we need to see Chirinos again at the back end of the rotation. You got the stuff that you saw from Elder early in the season. That doesn't seem like that's necessarily being matched right now. But a healthy Max Fried, you love that. I still think they probably need to kind of circle back to Michael Soroka and see what he can provide this team on the back end of that rotation. And as I said before, ultimately it comes down to, can you get enough pitching? Because we know what Atlanta can do. This is, I still believe, the most fun Braves team to watch of all time. But that's the kind of excitement that comes as you're kind of slugging your way like an 8-6 win or something like that. But pretty obviously, when they're not getting the big pitching performance, they do make it a little tougher on themselves. And so that's maybe something to keep in mind. Michael, I don't know how this sounds to you, but maybe the microphone set for Kaylee maybe a touch loud, but honestly, I don't know that. You may see something different back there on your side. Let's see what else. DT says, thanks for working on the stream. DT, I appreciate you being patient with us as we do. Thank you so much for that. Brady01 says, I know I'm supposed to be a Gator hater, and I am, but I also live on the Georgia-Tennessee line, and those Vols fans are the most delusional bunch of people that you will ever meet. And, I understand that. A lot of the rivalry stuff sort of is dictated by your geography. If you're way up there in the North Georgia mountains, then you do probably have a healthy distaste for Tennessee. That's probably true. If you live over there in the west part of the state, Carrollton, Columbus, certainly, Auburn folks kind of get on your nerves maybe a little bit more. I would say that we do believe, and our buddy Eddie, the mascot of DawgNation Daily, he certainly believes that a good Georgia fan is a Gator hater first and foremost. That's our overall charge for the fan base at large. But a lot of you have sort of specific circumstances that make certain games mean a little bit more to you than others. And I do understand where you're coming from on that. I really do. Morris Rich checking in. Happy Friday to you, Morris. Appreciate that. DT says a lot of stats actually don't matter. It's being clutch and winning that matters most. And also scoring, I would say, look, that was the thing about Monken that was just so good, is they found a way to really score a good, the way they moved the ball offensively against, mighty Michigan. Remember, we always have these discussions about this unstoppable Michigan team. But we saw a pretty good Michigan team face Georgia at the end of the 2021 season. And, boy, the Georgia offense was really functioning very well in that game, too. That we just saw Monken be at his best in kind of these sort of postseason situations. That's the clutch stuff that you're talking about. Do you go out and score a lot of points in the games that kind of matter the most? And I was also kind of thinking about this. Todd's first year at Georgia was in 2020. That was a year in which Georgia played exclusively SEC competition plus a top 10 ranked Cincinnati team in the bowl game. And you look at the overall numbers, that was year-over-year improvement offensively for Georgia in 2020, not 2021, 2022 national championship years, but in 2020, a relatively forgotten year for UGA. The truth is the overall offensive performance for Georgia got better, even though week to week it was playing much tougher competition than it was playing in 2019. Georgia in 2019, and I think I said this, feasted in a major way on Murray State and Arkansas State and Georgia Tech. They scored 50-plus points in all those games. And the overall end-of-season average looked kind of okay because of what you did against your non-conference foes. But you look at SEC competition that year, Georgia only scored about 21 points per game against SEC opponents there in 2019. Well, fast forward a year later, against solely SEC competition, in a weird year admittedly, but solely SEC competition, plus a good top 10 Cincinnati team that would actually be in the playoff the following year, Georgia went out and kind of performed better offensively, even against better competition. So that's another example of the bar being very, very high because of the accomplishments of Todd Monken. And to that end, and we're not going to have as much time today because we've got the two gas, we've got all kinds of stuff going on. I can't play as much of the Bobo stuff today as I'd kind of like to be honest with you. But I thought that Mike Bobo yesterday was extraordinary in terms of what he learned from Todd Monken, the reason why he came back to Georgia to begin with, and I just thought it was really candid, right? It was just honest, and it wasn't necessarily all that. There weren't that many moments in which you're high-fiving your dog fan buddies. Yeah, man, it wasn't necessarily a lot of red meat for Georgia fans, I don't think, but it was just honest. And I don't know. Sometimes, you're like me. A lot of you are. You watch a lot of these press conference things on YouTube or whatever else, whether it be Georgia or somebody else, and they all just kind of bleed together after a while because I don't know. Some of it doesn't feel always super authentic, but when a coach is just like honest, I don't know, it kind of comes across as something a little bit more substantial. And I thought both Dell McGee and Mike Bobo just felt really honest yesterday. And it was just kind of a cool thing to see. Worth your time if you want to. Go back and check it out, DawgNation on YouTube. PDT checks in to say the Yankees are coming to town next week, and if you've never been to a Yankees game at Brave Stadium, there's more Yankees fans than Braves. We'll see if that's true this time around, PD. We'll see if that's true this time around. Figuring any fan, 3 or 4 states around Georgia can get to New York just coming this evening, but still go Dogs, go for 3-23. So I think it'll be interesting. Now, admittedly, I haven't been to one of these like big fan base games in a while. Yankees, Red Sox, Cubs. I haven't been to one of those games at Truist Park in a while, but I'll tell you this. I don't know when the last time I've gone to Truist Park, I'm talking about the last couple of years, when the stadium wasn't full. It is amazing the level of support the Braves have been getting, kind of post-pandemic, obviously post-World Series championship. That clearly helps. I don't deny that. It's amazing the level of support they're getting. I mean, amazing. I've been to, because I actually go to a lot of day games for whatever reason. I guess my schedule just kind of dictates the time I'm most available to go sometimes in the day, and it's 100 degrees, and the stadium is as packed as anything. It'll be interesting. I know what you're talking about because I've been to old school Turner Field and, back in the early days of interleague play, and there would be just thousands of Yankees fans. Georgia and college football kind of travels in a very similar way to the way in which these like big Northeastern baseball teams, their fans either travel or just obviously there are a lot of, Northerners that live in Atlanta, and so that's their chance to go, maybe whatever else. But I'll be curious to see how true that is this time around, just given the overall fan support the Braves are getting. But Petey, it's worth paying attention to. B-Mac says he liked what Todd Hartley said about Brock Bowers. I'll be completely honest with you. My initial plan was to talk more about that on today's show. I decided to kind of shift that. We'll do that next week just because there's something else I want to do here for a moment because I thought some of the stuff that Dell McGee said was really good. But my plan was to do the Hartley-Bauer stuff today because I think that is really fun. But I gotta move that around for right now. I'm trying to keep the show to a certain like pace, and you'd say we'll try harder, BA, and I understand that. But we're trying to kind of get there in terms of a certain type of pace and rhythm for the show. So some of the stuff I wanted to do today or even yesterday, I haven't had time to do yet. But I promise we will get there because I am like you. I also thought that was really good. So today's a little bit different than normal because we actually already fire on some of our other video platforms. If you don't mind, though, just to kind of keep the consistency going here, I am going to pause for the 10 a.m. kind of welcome here because some people kind of expect that, so I don't want to confuse them. So even though we're actually already on video platforms today, let me pause, bring on, theoretically here, the rest of our video audience, and we'll just kind of keep the same rhythm going before we roll on for the show here today. So glad to have you here, and welcome to 10 a.m. Good morning, Dawg Nation. I am Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger, and we are happy to have you with us here today for a very, very fun show on tap. 2 great guests. Before we're done, it's former Georgia quarterback Jake Fromm. We recorded this yesterday. Jake's actually playing tonight, Washington Commanders against the Cleveland Browns. So fun reunion between Jake and his former teammate Nick Chubb, of course. And so we talked a little bit about that in the conversation that you're going to hear a bit later on. Jeff Sentell, I'll ask Jeff a couple of crucial questions. One of those is, what is next for the KJ Bolden situation? I have said emphatically, repeatedly, that I believe that Georgia is still a factor in this recruitment. I'm quite confident in that. So we'll give Jeff a chance to speak on that topic here today. And what's next for 5-star defensive lineman Williams Nwaneri? We'll get to that here, too, ahead of a decision for Nwaneri coming up in, just a couple of days now. I guess we're looking early next week for that to go down. So we've essentially arrived on the Nwaneri decision here, too. So keep that in mind. Georgia's got a scrimmage tomorrow. We'll do our part to preview some of that. But off the top of the show, I must confess, I believe, and while the coach didn't intend it this way, Georgia running backs coach Dell McGee's words that he spoke yesterday in a kind of a rare press conference appearance, I do think they should be taken as a little bit of a warning to Georgia fans, at least some of you. And I'm going to tell you why here coming up in just a moment. So what do you say we have some fun and get started right there today? It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. It's presented by Kroger, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Kroger, fresh for everyone.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
A little bit of shameless self-promotion here for a moment. Actually, it's not self-promotion. It's just promotion. I'm promoting something else. So I guess from that standpoint, maybe it's a little less shameless. But the point is, I think the DawgNation YouTube page is really worth your time here right now. Some of the stuff that we've gotten from Georgia coaches the last couple of days, I believe, has been outstanding. And it's been kind of fun to pivot. Not that I don't love UGA recruiting, and we're going to do a lot of that on our show today. I'm here for all of that too. But there's something about the talk about the upcoming season that's now only really a couple of weeks away that just sort of hits a little bit different because it feels like we're going to have some sort of resolution to some of this kind of stuff far sooner than we're going to have really ultimate resolution on some of these recruiting issues. So when you've got Georgia coaches, and this week we've heard from 4 of them. We've heard Mike Bobo and Dell McGee yesterday, Glenn Schumann, Todd Hartley earlier this week. And I think you ought to spend some time watching all of those interviews, those press conferences, because I just thought you got some really deep analysis from the coaches, wide-ranging commentary from them. I thought they were really honest, and they came across as, really authentic. And I just think it's kind of a cool thing to experience, guys that we don't hear from a ton, and they're very interesting. They're obviously key components to Georgia's success. And so if you haven't visited the DawgNation YouTube page to see those, I'm not just saying this because maybe I'm supposed to. I honestly believe that you'll enjoy that. It'll be a good use of your time, so I hope you'll check that out. Now, there is also something that one of those coaches said yesterday that I do admit ought to be kind of considered here from a certain stripe of UGA fan. And I don't mean to be this negative because I'm honestly not in a bad mood or negative about this, but I do think there is a vantage point with which you can look at something that one of the Georgia coaches said yesterday and sort of see that as perhaps a little bit of a warning, a little bit of a reminder of, hey, just be careful. Don't put yourself out there too far. Don't say something you can't take back later on. Just a little bit of a reminder about some of that kind of stuff. Now, let me give you some backstory, and then we'll kind of get to the point that I'm trying to make. Here's what we know about the last 2 years of Georgia football. There were some Georgia fans, and I don't mean to bring up a touchy subject, but it's just a fact. Facts are on my side in this particular case. There was kind of a pocket of Georgia fans that sort of backed themselves into a corner with their belief that Stetson Bennett was not capable of being the kind of quarterback to lead Georgia to great success. That's almost been completely forgotten and erased because of how successful Bennett ultimately became, but there were some Georgia fans kind of feuding with other Georgia fans for a while about the thought of, somehow Kirby Smart and Todd Monken, offensive coordinator at the time, making some sort of great error by staying with Stetson Bennett, and somehow that was doomed to fail. Georgia fans believed that, and it almost became their dominant personality trait, right? They were anti-Bennett type folks, and that's really kind of the way they thought of themselves. That was the way they wanted other people to sort of know them. It gave them maybe some clout, social media, online, something like that. I'm not quite sure, what the payoff on that was. But they became deeply entrenched in sort of an anti-Stetson Bennett belief. And as Georgia started having great success, I honestly think there was a pocket of Georgia fans, once again, not to bring up a touchy subject, but it is just a fact. I believe there was a pocket of Georgia fans that actually had a little bit of a hard time enjoying the success that Georgia was having, at least initially, because the success that Georgia was having was kind of proving some of their previous arguments wrong. And that kind of became a little bit of a dangerous place for those Georgia fans to be. So I am here right now to tell you that based on some words that a Georgia coach used yesterday, that some of you who may have done that before, or some of you who may be tempted to do that right now, be very careful here. Do not put yourself out there too far. Do not say anything right now that you can't take back, because if you are proven wrong on that, if your intuition is proven wrong, then ultimately you might live to regret it if you say too much now and kind of don't allow time to sort of play all of this out. Let me now get more specific about what I'm talking about. We have seen over the last few days around here, when I look at my comment sections on all the video platforms that we're on, or social media and things like that, seeing a little bit of, I think the right word here is skepticism. seeing a little bit of skepticism as it relates to the Georgia running back situation. And the main motivator for all of this is the fact that Kendall Milton is once again dealing with a hamstring injury, much the same way it plagued him during spring, and various injuries have kind of plagued him during his Georgia career. We now have Milton as less than a full go here right now. He was dressed in uniform, and he was, kind of doing some conditioning work on the side when media got a chance to be at Georgia practice. I think it was on Tuesday, but he is not a full go and a full participant right now. And that has raised a lot of concerns among some Georgia fans about not just the current state of this Georgia running back room, but the status of Milton in particular, because this is supposed to be Kendall's big year here at UGA. Now, on the one hand, I get it. Anytime this many Georgia fans are talking about any one subject, it's at least worth considering. And there's a certain wisdom of crowds that sort of kind of bleeds into stuff like this of if enough people think the same thing, even if they're wrong, you should at least consider what it is they're saying. And enough people have sort of brought up and addressed issues as it relates to the Georgia running backs here right now that it's at least worth considering. In fact, on our show, we have considered some of this over the course of the last couple of years. We've kind of pointed out, hey, a little bit of a different statistical profile for Georgia at the running back spot. Not quite as many explosive runs as you would have seen from this group before. And perhaps there's all kinds of reasons for why that is. Offense has certainly changed. We'll talk more about that in a moment based on something that Dell McGee said. But we ourselves have even kind of contributed to the conversation of, hey, this needs to be a big year for Georgia running backs, be a great way to kind of help a brand new quarterback, be a great way to provide a value add for this offense overall. There is an opportunity here for the Georgia running back situation to provide just a little bit more for this team right now. And I feel comfortable in what we've said about all of that. And I certainly understand why Georgia fans are very anxious, kind of on pins and needles, to see the best of Kendall Milton for a full season, because it seems like he's been so close to breakout for such a long time. And, for whatever reason, either because of the overall depth in the room or the injuries that he's dealt with or whatever else, we haven't quite gotten there with Kendall yet. So I get the anxiousness, the eagerness to kind of see that from Kendall Milton. I understand all of that. But just be very, very careful that you don't allow that feeling of, hey, I'm ready to see more from Georgia running backs. I'm ready to see more from Kendall Milton, ready to see him stay healthy. Be very careful that you don't let some concern about what you believe might be happening with this Georgia running back spot right now allow you to take your point of view and your opinion too far, and you end up saying something you can't take back. Because much the same way Stetson Bennett sort of proved some doubters and detractors wrong, even within the bubble of DawgNation, this Georgia running back situation, if you doubt it too much going into the start of the year, might have the opportunity to kind of do the same thing. In fact, this is the kind of word of warning that Dell McGee provided you yesterday. I think when I judge social media, when I judge our comment sections, I see a lot of Georgia fans who are slightly less than confident about what Georgia has at the running back spot right now. But that is not the way apparently Dell McGee himself feels about this. In fact, yesterday, he was actually quite positive in looking at the overall situation with his position group, despite the fact there's obviously a high-profile injury and some overall concerns about how this team replaces some of the talent that it's lost in recent years. This is Dell McGee.
I'm very confident. I think we have the right guys. They have the right mindset. They're working their butts off. They do extra for us. Film study. They're really connected as a group, and our offense won't live and die by our running backs. We got really good players all over the football field. So I think our running back room will be by committee. Whoever has the hot hand will earn those touches, and we'll spread the ball out and find out who needs to touch the ball as the game goes on.
So let me repeat myself on this for a moment. I fully believe it's fair to ask questions about, okay, what is going on at running back here right now, especially when a guy like Kendall Milton is battling injury, especially when the other day Kirby Smart, when he was asked directly about running backs, he kind of spent more time praising Cash Jones, which very well may prove to be a very good thing, and Jones may prove to be a valuable player for UGA. But when you're praising Jones and kind of not saying as much about some of the other running backs, some of that silence in terms of the other players, that really kind of stands out, and that becomes, I think, at times kind of noticeable. So we ourselves have asked some significant questions about the Georgia running back situation, but I believe what Dell McGee is saying there is, hey, just because there are questions, don't assume there aren't also really good answers. And McGee believes, according to what he says there, that there are still some really good answers for Georgia at the running back position. McGee, at the beginning of that clip, uses the word confident. So if you have a lack of confidence about this Georgia running back situation right now, just know the guy who sees them up close and, chooses his words pretty carefully, he apparently is a lot more confident in his situation than you might be here right now. Just take that as a word of warning not to get yourself too far out in front on whatever you might believe here. Even on the case of Kendall Milton in particular, and you should watch the full video online at DawgNation.com. He got more into the fact that while Kendall's kind of battling this injury, remains a very big leader for Georgia right now. In other words, he may be sidelined with a hamstring, but he's not sidelined from a top of mind perspective. He's still very much a big factor in all this, remains a big leader, still working very hard. And I think the phrase that McGee used in particular was battling through all this just fine. It sounds like McGee thinks, even though Kendall's kind of dealt with some of this kind of stuff, that he's going to push through and may actually live up to some of the gigantic expectations that have sort of existed for him. So be very careful assuming the negative about him or the running back situation or anything like that. Georgia has a way of proving its detractors wrong, and if you become one of those detractors, you yourself could eventually be proven wrong. They're on that there as well. And one more thing before we kind of shift gears and talk about something else. I think it's also really interesting how candid Dell McGee was in terms of how we evaluate running backs at Georgia here right now. There was a time in 2017 and 2018 when this team was leading the SEC in rushing back-to-back years, and you know how explosive the tandem of Nick Chubb and Sony Michel were obviously in 2016, 2017, but even in 2018, people forget how good of a year Elijah Holyfield had for Georgia. And Holyfield and Swift as a tandem that year were really just as effective running the ball as probably the more famous Chubb and Michel had been in the prior year, that Georgia was just this dominant force running the ball back then. But in the subsequent years, we've seen a little bit of an offensive transformation for UGA. They kind of do things a little bit different. And the way in which Georgia does things different offensively, I believe, requires now a little bit different evaluation of the running back position there as well. And this is one of the areas in which McGee was also candid yesterday in terms of, hey, he's confident that his running backs can have a big year. And in terms of evaluating what it is they do to have a big year, Dell McGee sort of told you how the offensive evolution has impacted the way we should view running backs. This is Dell McGee yesterday.
I would say philosophically, where we've gone from the three coordinators that we've had, it's kind of changed because of who we had in the room. First getting here with Coach Chaney, just establishing that line of scrimmage, run game. Plus we had two really good backs that were older, that had carried the load and understood running the football, and it wasn't a whole lot to teach there. And kind of progressing through Coley and even into Monk, and getting the backs more involved in the passing game has tremendously increased. And I think your recruiting philosophy has to change a little bit to kind of cater to what the coordinator wants. And when Monken was here, he showed that he wanted to have running backs that were able to create things in space, catch the football, create matchups for linebackers, and I think that philosophy still stands.
So we know that's the emphatic result of the 2024 class, right? I mean, that's what Nate Frazier is going to be here to do. That's what Dwight Phillips is going to be here to do. Obviously Chauncey Bowen's a part of that group too, but we know the kind of athleticism that McGee says they are catching the ball out of the backfield. That's what the 2024 soon-to-be signees commits right now. That's what we believe they'll be able to provide. But even on this team here right now, that's the way in which we ought to evaluate what a Dejon Edwards can do, what a healthy Kendall Milton can do, why it is that Cash Jones has earned some early praise because he might be able to do that. That in the modern version of the Georgia offense here in 2023, now led by Mike Bobo, previously led by Todd Monken, it's still the same thing according to Dell McGee, that our running backs, he would say, are going to be pass catchers. The guys that Georgia's employing there at that position are going to kind of show what they can do in the passing attack. And the best versions of the Georgia offense have included a Kenny McIntosh a year ago, a James Cook before that, Sony Michel kind of going back. He was also, at times a pretty dynamic pass-catching weapon in his own right. the athletic running back that can catch the football, make guys miss in space, and turn those into big explosive plays. So when you're looking for a major contribution from the Georgia running back situation, you'll see what they can do when thrown to as much almost as what they can do when they are handing, and taking the ball on carries there as well. That's kind of the new version of the Georgia running back situation. But the overall point here is, I get why there's a little bit of angst about this running back situation here right now. Kendall Milton's injury setback is a disappointment, but Dell McGee seems to think Kendall can be fine when it matters most. And the Georgia running back room overall, which has some questions because we didn't see a ton of healthy guys during spring practice, and Georgia's obviously lost a lot from that position over the course of the last couple of years, Dell McGee remains steadfastly confident there as well. So if your confidence has waned, if you're not quite so sure, just be really careful about what you say about this situation right now, because Dell McGee's the guy who knows, and he seems to think this group can still be pretty good. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger, and good to have you with us across all video platforms. Really, really appreciate that. Podcast as well, radio, so many ways to connect with our show. And I just really appreciate you picking one, being a part of it, and doing some fun stuff. Thank you so much for all of that. We are just really, really grateful to have you here today. And a really big thanks to our friends at Kroger for making this all possible there as well. Obviously, Kroger's got so many fun things going on here right now. I'm going to tell you more about this later on. We'll do this with Jake Fromm, but I'll remind you here again, the Kroger Chef Jr. ongoing here right now. You've got another opportunity to take advantage of this coming up here really very soon. So this is tomorrow and next, the 26th there as well. It's Kroger Chef Jr. with the Atlanta Braves. So it's a really fun way to get your kids involved in a cooking experience, and sometimes it's just sort of fun for them to see what food preparation is all about. This month, it's a cool item. It's the chili slaw dog. Obviously, you think about baseball and hot dogs kind of going together, so Kroger Chef Jr. doing that there as well. And it's just $7 per child, and you get a chance to make the item this month, the chili slaw dog. But you also get kind of a sort of a Braves branded apron there too, which is really cool. And the regular stuff that you always get with Kroger Chef Jr., the apron, the patch, the recipe card holder, the tongs, all just $7 per child. So make sure you check them out online. KrogerChefJr.com. Now, as you've heard me say a million times, the word junior spelled out, Junior. KrogerChefJr.com for a lot more on that. By the way, speaking of Kroger, as I said before, we'll do a Kroger Fresh Take with Jake Fromm here, and we'll give you another reminder of Kroger Chef Jr. at that time as well. But we'll do that with Jake Fromm here before we're done on the show here today. And we are also proud right now to announce the final winner of our Celebrating Outstanding Teachers contest, courtesy of Kroger. What a great picture of the family there. Good-looking Georgia shirt there, too. So Andrea Lee is our winner here today, nominated by her husband, an extraordinary teacher, 18 years of experience in the Atlanta area. Her passion and dedication, her husband says, has largely gone unrecognized other than the considerable amount of extra responsibilities given to her by principals. Listen, for those of you that know something about the school system, you understand that. Principals are always looking for folks on the job who can just sort of get it done, and they always seem to sort of get those extra responsibilities. So it sounds like Andrea is one of those for sure. One of her defining qualities is her ability to create a warm and inclusive classroom environment. She ensures that every student not only receives great education, but also feels cared for. And that's what great teachers certainly do, for sure. So she's been in Forsyth, Gwinnett, Hall County, which is obviously the county I grew up in, so that's kind of a cool thing. Tremendous legacy for her as a great teacher, and a very, very worthy final recipient of our Celebrating Outstanding Teachers contest, courtesy of Kroger. So Andrea Lee, 18 great years of work, wonderful family that she's doing a great job taking care of there too. You love to be able to see that. So congratulations, Andrea, and thanks for a great submission. Andrea gets 4 great gift cards. Nominator gets a great gift card there as well. So great celebration of a wonderful teacher. And boy, we're kind of back to school everywhere now, and so it's fun to see everybody back and enjoying that. And of course, great teachers make all of that possible. We've got some recruiting stuff coming up with Jeff Sentell here in a couple of minutes. That is going to be a lot of fun. Prior to that, let's go around the DawgHouse. And it's poured today by our friends at the Finnish Long Drink. Always fun to have them with us here on a Friday. And tomorrow is kind of an interesting day around DawgNation in that Georgia will hold a scrimmage inside of Sanford Stadium. Now, when I talk to Jake Fromm later on, we're going to talk about this. The vibe of a scrimmage, it's 11 on 11. You know, you're in a stadium. There are some people in the stadium, some of the some of the wealthier among us will get a chance to be there tomorrow. A lot of the McGill folks get invited to be a part of this, so they'll be having a good time there and be in on all of that. But the point is it's a pretty good measuring stick for where things stand with a lot of the competitions ongoing for Georgia right now. And in particular, obviously, the most interesting part of that's what's going to happen at quarterback. Carson back, who I think has been perceived to be the leader. Does he hold on to that status? Is Brock Vandagriff working to kind of close the gap on all of this kind of stuff? So yesterday, we got a chance to hear from Georgia offensive coordinator Mike Bobo. Now, the majority of what Bobo talked about during his time, we'll get into probably, I would say, more in the days to come, because he gave some great insight into his evolution as a coach from the time he was at Georgia before to now being back at Georgia, what he learned specifically from Todd Monken. Like, a lot of that stuff is just really very good. I used the word honest before. I think it's just really honest and authentic, and we're going to get into more of that because I think it's just very compelling. But for now, though, Bobo on the subject that all offensive coordinators are asked about, quarterback competition, how it's playing out, what you're looking to see. This is what Mike Bobo said about quarterbacks yesterday.
We're basically finishing up our last day of install today, and then tomorrow will be a review, and then we have the scrimmage. But I've been pleased with all the quarterbacks. We've been focusing on the process of each practice and each install and focusing on what we can control in that moment. These guys have done a great job. There have been ups and downs, but they've been focused. They've come into every meeting ready to go, prepared before the meeting. And then Saturday is a scrimmage. It's the closest thing that we can get to a game. It's how are you going to handle those situations when you're out there with a team by yourself. There's no coaches on the field. And the bottom line for a quarterback, it's can we execute? Are you going to be able to execute and get us in the right play, get us in the right protection, run the offense, handle third down situations, red zone situations, and that's what we're looking for, handling those situations in a game and having continuity on offense.
You've heard the old cliche about if a tree falls in the woods, does it make a sound? That's not going to be this scrimmage tomorrow. It's not going to be a silent tree falling in empty woods. There are going to be people there. There are going to be, boosters there, and they are going to talk about what they see. And oftentimes quarterbacks can be a fairly simple evaluation. Not footwork and things like that, but did the ball go where it was supposed to go? Did the offense end up in the end zone? And if it does, we'll hear about it. And for either of these guys, Vandagriff, Stockton, obviously Carson back, and for those who legitimately are, McGill types, and they've been to these kind of scrimmages before, what they'll tell you is, hey, this is real football. Now, quarterbacks aren't being tackled to the ground, but it's real football. This is an offense trying to score on the Georgia defense, and that ain't easy. Bad grammar, intentional. In other words, if you've been to some of these McGill scrimmages before, what I've heard from people who have been is that, hey, sometimes the ball doesn't go into the end zone as much as you think it probably should, because this is, once again, a team trying to score on Georgia's defense. So it is quite possible that it's not the greatest day in the world for a Beck or a Vandagriff or whatever else. This is not like one of those made-for-TV type things the way that some spring games are, where it's designed to make so-and-so look good. This is designed to get good. Sometimes spring games are designed to make you look good, not necessarily always at Georgia, but certainly some other places. They have, they have spring games that are basically like the equivalent of professional wrestling, where the first team offense is against the sort of jobber squad of like the low second team defense. Georgia doesn't do its spring games that way, but some SEC teams do, because they want the first team offense to look good, because they want the fans to leave happy. Well, that's what some teams do for their spring game. That is definitely not what Georgia's doing for this thing tomorrow. This is real football, and let's see how ready you are to kind of play against a real opponent. Far tougher, by the way, than almost anything that Georgia will face in September is what it's going to face tomorrow. So that's the context for all of this. And if one of those quarterbacks can look good in that moment, no matter which unit they're facing Georgia defensively, because honestly, we would say second and third team defenses for Georgia are still a pretty tough, that's a pretty full meal to try to eat in its own right. So the rumors and the stuff that kind of comes out here are going to be, really interesting. And the degree to which the Kirby Smart chooses to confirm some of this tomorrow, I think when he speaks with his press conference, that's going to be pretty interesting too. This is the kind of time in which you probably won't have to read between the lines too much. If somebody has a really good day, we'll probably find it out. And if it's one of those deals where, maybe nobody stood out from the others, then that's I don't want to say that's a bad sign for Carson Beck, but it's tomorrow's Carson's day to show himself like a starting quarterback, to be, even against the number one Georgia defense, the guy that looks like the clear leader in all of this. And the longer it goes without having some sort of confirmation to that effect, then the more the door might be open for a Brock Vandegrift or something like that. So just keep all of that in mind in terms of the larger overall context. This is real football tomorrow, and people will be there to see it. And what they see, they will tell. And what they tell could give us a little bit of an insight into what's happening next with this Georgia quarterback situation. Fun time to be a Dog fan. A lot going on here right now, and some of that playing out between the hedges there tomorrow with Kirby Smart set to speak after. And, of course, DawgNation.com busy covering it all. And that is around the DawgHouse. And it's poured today by our friends at the Finish Long Drink. And boy, oh boy, we have had a lot of fun with the Finish Long Drink through the years. And, I'm kind of a traditionalist. I'm just sort of a classic guy. And my favorite version of the Finish Long Drink has been the long drink, what they call the traditional. I just sort of think of it as the classic version. It's the blue can. It's got the grapefruit flavor. It's the gin kick that goes along with that. I just love the way the grapefruit and the gin kind of mix together. I think it's a really fun, especially outdoor summertime drink. I love it for stuff like that. And many of you kind of have your own version of that there as well. Whether it be the cranberry, the long drink strong, long drink zero, no carbs, no sugar. Some of you are trying to get back down to your playing weight ahead of the upcoming season. That's certainly a good way to help you do all of that. But stop the presses moment here, because the thing that we've been getting so much reaction about lately is the brand new version of the Finish Long Drink, special for the Peach State. How about a peach-flavored version of the Finish Long Drink there as well? My prediction is this is going to be a massive part of so many tailgates here coming up over the course of the next few weeks, because, honestly, that can just looks awesome, the peach-flavored, peach-colored can. And we love all of that here in the Peach State, to be sure. So if you go to thelongdrink.com, you can find out where you can pick up some Finish Long Drink today, including the brand new peach-flavored version of the Finish Long Drink. So I hope that you will do just that. All right, so we are jam-packed and loaded, and we're going to keep it rolling here. Jake Fromm coming up in just a little bit. Kroger Fresh Take with him. Jake plays a game tonight. We'll talk about that against a familiar foe, which is kind of funny. We'll get into some of that. What to expect from one of these scrimmages inside Sanford Stadium, the way in which the heart beats just a little bit faster when it gets to be 11-on-11 between the hedges. Even though it's not a real game, it's still quite competitive. Jake will tell us more about that there as well, and his thoughts, and the guy we just heard from, Mike Bobo, there as well, because Jake spent some time around this program even lately. He kind of has a little bit of insight on that, so we'll cover a lot of that ground with Jake Fromm here coming up in just a couple of minutes. Prior to that, also a lot to break down here. Now, I have said emphatically for days and days and days that I don't think this situation with KJ Bolden is over, not by a long shot. That's not a prediction that he's coming to Georgia, but it is a prediction that this story is not finished yet as far as UGA is concerned. Is that true? We'll let Jeff Sentell tell us now. It is DawgNation Daily, and it is time for Jeff Sentell to break down some recruiting information here on the program today. Glad to have him and you with us here today.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
So let's bring in Jeff Sentell, and I'll keep the conversation going that I just started right there. Jeff, Kirby Smart's a tough guy. Physically, probably. Mentally, certainly. And mentally tough people don't get their feelings hurt very easily. Last Saturday on streaming video, KJ Bolden chose Florida State over UGA. But that's not a binding referendum. That's not a signed contract. That's simply the next phase in this recruitment. And I am very steadfast in my belief, if Georgia hosted him on 16 visits, if Kirby Smart took the lead in the Bolden recruitment, which we're led to believe that he did, all of that's not going to change on a dime simply because Bolden said Florida State over UGA. I have been strong in my belief that I think Georgia's going to still make its best pitch for KJ Bolden. Now, will they match the allegedly exorbitant, price that Florida State supposedly kind of thrown out there? Maybe not, but that doesn't mean they have to either necessarily to win this recruitment. There's a lot that can go on as it relates to some stuff like that. So separate fact from fiction for me here a little bit. Do you believe that UGA remains a strong factor for KJ Bolden, even though Bolden chose Florida State last Saturday?
Good morning. Hey, Brandon. How's everybody? I think so, yeah. I think took no greater example than Peyton Woodyard. Peyton Woodyard committed to Georgia back in January, and he was like, man, this is the spot. I've known it was the spot. His family even told me from his second visit that he knew Georgia was the spot. But we've said many times, Brandon, that I actually dabble in a field that's kind of about as unstable as it gets, besides like nuclear reactors, I guess, and that's the hearts and minds and thoughts and emotions of 17, 18-year-old boys. And high schoolers, especially a high school young man, can take their they can change on a dime. So, like, with Woodyard, there was an example there. Well, Alabama was a dream school, and Alabama kept coming, and the official visits went great. And I think that was part of a reevaluation and a change of heart. I think those change of hearts happen all the time. I'm not foolish enough to think that NIL wasn't a major influence here, but there was a reason we've written about KJ Bolden. We don't like to mislead anybody out there. And for a long time, a very long time, I thought KJ Bolden was going to be a Dawg. And even I hold the belief that over the last week leading up to that decision, he went back and forth between Georgia and Florida State. So things can change. What's that? One of my favorite movies of all time. I sometimes try to, I sometimes always kidded with my friends one way. I believe it was Varsity Blues and that phrase called "things change, Mox." Well, things change all the time in high school recruiting.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm reminded of like the example of Deion Sanders, ironically a former Nole in his own right, but when he was hired as Colorado coach, the question went to the sort of key leadership there of, do you have the money to pay him? And their basic response was, no, but we're not worried about getting it. And I think that's a template for how a lot of college athletics probably operates. I don't mind telling you that for Florida State, I believe the next phase of all this is, hey, congratulations, you were able to throw out a it's like the Logan Roy thing, congratulations, you gave the biggest number. Congratulations to Florida State, they threw out the biggest number. Doesn't take a genius to do that, but now you've got to actually kind of raise those funds, or at least a down payment on those funds. And if somehow that doesn't quite happen in the NIL age, we have seen some of that fundraising not exactly come at the pace required. If that ends up being the case, then that to me is a very easy way in which that door could still remain open.
Yeah, I think the thing with KJ though is, I keep coming back to, I think it's an equation. I think it's a formula. He loved the place. I was at the ceremony talking to a lot of well-wishers before and afterward to get the pulse of what they thought, and he was really ingrained with Florida State at an early age, and then he wasn't, because Florida State wasn't, ascending. Now Florida State's an ascending program. And I think when I say things can change in recruiting, Brandon, you best believe things can change a lot in college football. Let's say Florida State doesn't have the soaring year that most expect them to be a top 5, top 10 team. I think that could put a little damper on the spirit there, and I think that what they're trying to do to negotiate their way out of the ACC, that's also another major fundraising effort for Florida State as well. Let's see what happens when the games are played. I'm of the belief, Brandon, that there's no better recruiting pitch in the country right now than just watching Georgia play football on a Saturday, watching what they do at home, watching those fans. I still am going to refer to that moment last year for most of the 2024 and 2025 classes. Those that were in the stands at Tennessee, there's going to be a very high conversion rate on key targets, key undecided targets at the time that wind up being Dogs. And the great thing about the Georgia football program right now is they have one of those every season. I can remember pointing to the Clemson game in 2021 when Georgia beat Clemson in Charlotte. It really changed the momentum of the Georgia program. That was the shot in the arm Georgia needed. And I remember vividly coming out of that game talking to recruits, and recruits would always tell me how it was like living through that moment, being in that stadium, Brandon. I'm sure a lot of DawgNation Daily audience is feeling that with me too, because when Georgia left that and Clemson was having to leave the stadium and Georgia fans were just berating them in SEC, and how Georgia fans took over another stadium and were controlling that moment, that leaves a very powerful memory in the hearts and minds of those young boys as well.
So let's drill down on this, and we'll kind of move on after this. I am by no means willing to make a prediction on how this ends, but I want to ask you a very specific question here. You talked about, the feeling when you watch Georgia, that's the best pitch that Georgia can make here right now. Do you believe that Bolden will do that in person between the hedges at least some point this year?
Yeah. Do I think he'll take a visit? Yeah, I think he'll
There
take
you
a
go.
visit. I mean,
It's
kind of too convenient. It's kind of Brandon. We saw Justice Haynes and Caleb Downs in Sanford Stadium last year when those guys had made a very, very much publicized, very controversial decision, at least in DawgNation, at least in the state of Georgia, to go to Alabama. But then when Georgia teed it up between the hedges for a big game, they were there. They wanted to be around it. They wanted to watch a good football game, and it was just very close by. It's kind of funny how proximity to Georgia still allows a lot of players that chose elsewhere. They still want to come to Stanford, and they still want to see a great football game between two top 15, top 20 teams. They may not get it this year, depending on what some opponents do. But, yeah, I do think that Georgia will draw in some of those guys that even the KJ Bolden types that we see it every year. The guys are committed. The guys say they're solidly committed, but everybody still looks around.
I hope Florida State kept the receipt. That's all I'm saying. I hope they kept the receipt. It's hard not to talk about this without kind of also kind of connecting the Woodyard thing to it there a little bit. So kind of in a similar vein here, I think the read on this, and admittedly this is probably a little bit of a kind of a half-baked opinion here a little bit. Clearly I believe Georgia must have wanted Woodyard. He wouldn't have still been a commitment as long as he was if it didn't. But at the same time, it's sort of obvious here that Woodyard took visits after his official visit to UGA. Georgia was clearly, I think, the best that I can tell, more aggressive in the direction of Bolden than it was in the direction of Woodyard. That just kind of, to me, seems at least circumstantially true here. And that somehow, Woodyard's a player that Georgia really liked, but maybe Woodyard himself, maybe he didn't feel like he was getting the love the way that another, safety in this particular class is. How similar is that to your line of thinking on what ultimately led Woodyard to become a member of this Alabama class instead of being in Georgia's?
Well, so there's the dream school hometown type thing there. I know that sounds weird for Woodyard growing up and residing in California, but the Woodyard family has Alabama roots. His dad grew up in Mobile. His dad still, he's a deputy chief of the Los Angeles Police Department, very successful, very accomplished, very intelligent man, and he's always been Roll Tide. He's grown up Roll Tide, and even when his son chose Georgia, he's like, well, I've been Roll Tide, but I'm a bigger Peyton Woodyard fan than I am an Alabama fan. So he was kind of going to be a dog as long as Peyton Woodyard was in the state of Georgia playing for Georgia. That's one factor, but here's what I really think, B.A. I think what was different about the Woodyard recruiting is, even though he chose Georgia very early, based on a key core relationship with Fran Brown, he wasn't the type of safety Georgia has been going out for recently. And what I mean by that is the supreme athlete, the one that could play a lot of positions. It could play the nickel, could play a nickel corner for some, could play the star for Georgia, could play some corner and still play winning football and not get you beat. At least coming into Georgia, Kirby Smart talks about cross-training a lot, but Georgia likes to bring in a lot of highly adaptable DBs. I think Jonell Aguero is one of those. Javon Bullard is showing that right now, and will do so again this season right before our very eyes. But Woodyard is a guy that was always going to be a three-down safety, maybe a box safety. He was a traditional safety. Athleticism probably wasn't his chief core trait, at least not blinding speed. He was football IQ savvy. He was intelligent. He was a smart player. He was physical. And in comparison to guys like Malachi Starks, KJ Bolden, of course, and even a guy like Cam McKell, which I think you start thinking about what does Georgia do in that defensive backfield going forward now, when all of a sudden it felt like Noah's Ark. They were crammed in 2x2 with All-Americans in the safety depth chart, the future safety depth chart. All of a sudden you've got at least 2 seasons, counting this one with Malachi Starks. You got 3 seasons with Jonell Aguero. I think Ja'Cory Thomas is still around doing some good things, but it's kind of funny, Brandon, how maybe how the fortunes or the outlook for the safety spot at Georgia, at least on the recruiting trail, started to dim over the last 2 weeks. At the same time, you heard glowing reports about Chris Peel, Kyron Jones, again, another two pair of guys that run 10-5s, 10-4s, 10-3s that can play a lot of positions in the defensive secondary for Georgia. You heard a lot of Justin Rett as well, really fast, athletic, physical, jackhammer DBs that were already impressing in fall camp. So while everyone looks to the recruiting trail and says, hey, man, Jeff, where are the safeties? Who are the safeties going to be now? I would like to remind folks that Georgia always goes hard in the lane, hard in the paint for DBs every year, and they picked up 3 or 4 really good DBs, aside from a guy like A.J. Harris, who's a pure corner in the 2023 class. And those seeds are already bearing fruit right now with some glowing reports, or at least some good reports coming out of fall camp for all those gentlemen.
Let's talk about the commitment of Nate Frazier, the 4-star running back, going back to Saturday. I mean, that's a guy that, multiple outlets going to have as number 1 running back overall. So this is a big-time get for Georgia. And to me, maybe obviously Dylan Raiola probably takes the top spot here, but the second most fun thing about this 2024 class for Georgia, I believe, Jeff, is the athleticism brought in at the running back position. Obviously, Frazier's an example of that, and that's the man of the hour here right now. But I'm going to tell you, and I know I got a little bit of a Peach State bias, I guess, sometimes, but Jeff, I've talked to a lot of people over the last few days. They are buzzing about Dwight Phillips. Dwight Phillips is a guy right now you can't kick to. You cannot kick to him. If he's on your schedule, you know that now. You cannot kick off to Dwight Phillips because, he housed one from 95 yards the other day in a scrimmage. So that's a guy here. Frazier's megawatt athlete here right now. I think Chauncey Bowen's flipping him from Florida. That's a big deal. One of 3 top 10 backs in this 2024 class. We heard from Dell McGee this week. I thought he was outstanding at the podium. And listen, I think McGee's got reason to flex here right now. The athleticism that he's about to repopulate this Georgia running back room with, Jeff, I think it's substantial, and I think that Frazier's a big part of that. So give me a thumbnail on the Frazier commitment if you don't mind.
Yeah, so you said a lot there, B.A. I think the thumbnail, what you said there about Phillips, I think he's going to be the most electric player in this class. And he tells me with all authority in the world, I think his dad might even start training him a little bit for his senior year. He wants to run in the 10s, Brandon, the 10-Os, 10.06, 10.07, 10.10, and as a senior in high school. And Brandon, I don't think there's ever been a player, and if people would probably write to challenge me and say, well, what about Herschel way back when in 1980? He started running some impressive track times. I'm talking about a high school kid with a verified laser time. Dwight Phillips probably will be the most laser verified fastest prospect Georgia has ever brought in to the program, and yet somehow there's probably 7 or 8 names, maybe even 9 or 10 names that get folks more excited in this recruiting class. It's something different, and I was very glad our colleague Connor Riley asked Dell McGee this question yesterday because it had been on my mind, and he asked him a specific question about how Dell McGee's recruiting philosophy has evolved over his 8 years at Georgia. And I think it was a sodium pentothal answer from Coach McGee. He was very straightforward and honest. And he said, well, quite honestly, one of the things that happens is your needs as a recruiter, you go out looking for those traits that are valued by your offensive coordinator. So for a lot of folks that wonder what Mike Bobo is going to be like, and will he kind of continue what's going with Todd Monken, Dell McGee gave you the roadmap to the answer right there. He said that they were looking for backs that could do more vertically, that could do more in the passing game, and that can help you a little bit more on all 3 downs compared to previous classes. There was an adjustment in recruiting philosophy to look for a player like a Dwight Phillips and also to look for a player like Nate Frazier. Right on the bulletin board thing you can say about Nate Frazier is there are no Sean Marino, DeAndre Swift parallels to this game. And then there's probably 33% of his game that I feel is unique to this specific back. He's 5'10", he's about 5'10", 5'11", he's about 210 pounds. He's a 10-5 guy as well. Somehow Georgia has 2 backs where one guy is 3 or 4 tenths of a second faster than the next fastest back in the room, and that causes not consternation but outright jubilation and break your chair excitement a little bit. I think Frazier, the most things people need to know about him. I was so excited about the commitment on Before the Hedges this week that I did something that I'll probably do a lot more of, but I wanted to take his greatest hits off his film and break down why I think Nate Frazier is special, and that means distilling 7.5 minutes of highlight reels to about 3 minutes of pure highlight gold. And Nate Frazier even, I love it, Brandon, his huddle highlight tape has a specific section of him in pass pro and picking up blocks and taking on 4-star linebackers coming in off the edge by himself, or jumping up in the gap and stoning somebody coming through a gap off a free release to the quarterback. Nate Frazier can show you all the home runs. He can show you his tail lights. He can show you touchdown goes Frazier, but then he can pick up and do pass pro as well. As we all know, Brandon, that's the quickest way for an RBU talent to get on the field at Georgia, is show you can protect the passer on third down. And Nate Frazier, simply put, he's the highest-rated back Georgia has signed since Zamir White and James Cook in 2018, Brandon.
Yeah.
That's 5 full cycles. Now, Georgia's went and got a lot of diamonds in the rough or gems that turned out to be true gems, but they haven't gotten a back quite like this, going all the way back as far as the overall ranking goes, quite like this, going all the way back to Zamir and James Cook in 2018.
Next week, decision day will finally have arrived for 5-star defensive lineman Williams Nwaneri. On 3, ranks him as the number 1 overall prospect in the country right now. What's the latest on where things stand with him?
Yeah, all of a sudden Missouri has really came up out of nowhere, and Mizzou's a school that, went to head with Georgia for an in-state prospect with Luther Burden, and it may have taken an entire line of potato chips to do so, but Mizzou was able to keep that talent in-state. I'm paying close attention to a recent NIL legislation in the state of Missouri, Brandon, where players that sign with the in-state school can start receiving NIL monies immediately while they're still in high school, and that's kind of an agenda setter right now for a program that wants to keep their key blue chip prospects in state. And what I'm hearing, Brandon, I'm just going to be frank and honest, I'm hearing there's an significant NIL portion of this recruitment right now, and we all know Georgia is not going to be the highest bidders at all when it comes to an NIL recruitment, no matter how good you are.
Yeah, I mean, obviously that's been the concern the entire time here. Otherwise, Missouri probably wouldn't have much of a chance on this at all. You would be sort of stand to believe. So it sounds like, I think we conclude from that you don't think it's good news for Georgia here right now.
Not right now, I don't think, and it just means it's going to have to be a paradigm shift in terms of what the athlete wants. Does the athlete want that NFL development that only a school like Georgia and maybe a couple others can provide? Or does he want a combination of the two? Or what does he really think? Is it a belief in himself that he can get to the first round of the NFL draft out of anywhere? I know that he likes Georgia a lot. I know he has family in the state of Georgia. I know Georgia is more than one of those uncreased Bills hats on the table. I think Georgia has a chance here to win this recruitment. But I think it's really going to come down to, Brandon, is what the recruit is going to value when it comes time to make that decision. Is it he can point to when was the last time Mizzou had a first-round defensive lineman drafted, or he could point to when was the last time Georgia had first-round defensive lineman drafted, or a number 1 overall pick drafted, and that those guaranteed NFL monies that come with that. I think it's going to be a true choice here between NFL development and NIL development, with maybe a little element there of staying close to home as well.
Yeah, Jeff, I appreciate the candor there on that. We'll obviously be watching that to see how that plays out. Of course, reading everything you've got coming at DawgNation.com, too. Hope you enjoy your weekend, and we'll look forward to seeing you back here again on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger very soon.
Brandon, appreciate you, man. Have a wonderful weekend, my man. We are almost here to the start of kickoff.
We are indeed the case. Thanks a lot, Jeff. We'll talk to you soon.
Yes, sir.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Yeah, I'm not really surprised by anything that Jeff says there about that. I've always sort of felt like the Nwaneri thing was probably a difficult pull. I guess I don't wave the white flag on that yet because I don't have enough information to allow me to. But, I mean, I think we've always been of the assumption that NIL would likely end up being a very big factor in all of this. And so, yeah, I mean, ultimately, he wouldn't be going to Missouri if not. I mean, there's just, or at least he wouldn't even be considering Missouri if not. Obviously, Oklahoma would say they're a big factor in this too. It's been interesting to see how various, people, whether they be more connected media-wise to Missouri or Oklahoma or whatever, have kind of thought different things throughout this. I guess the Georgia-centric media sort of had their perspective on this too. So, kind of where you're located has kind of gone a long way towards how you've sort of discussed all of this there as well. And, I guess I'm not really surprised by what you hear from Jeff Sentell said there. That's always going to sort of felt like that was going to be a big factor in all this before it was all said and done. So we'll see if anything changes with that here for right now, but an interesting update from Jeff Sentell. Jake Fromm, by the way, coming up in just a moment. Prior to that, let's go cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean, and let's think about all the really fun things that Royal Caribbean's got going on here right now. Thinking about 2024, 3 big exciting things to think about, including the DawgNation cruise. Now, when we say bigger and better than ever before, here's why we say bigger and better, because we're going to be on a bigger ship than we've ever been before. We're going to be taking more people than we've ever taken before because the ship has room for them. We're going to be doing more DawgNation-themed events than we've ever done before there as well, and we want you to be a part of it. RoyalDogs.com, that is the website. RoyalDogs.com. It's a website that Jessica Slater, our great travel agent, specially selected for us by Royal Caribbean. Years ago, we said, hey, Royal Caribbean, you guys need, who do you want us to kind of use to help, book these vacations and make sure folks have a great time? Because our friends over at Royal Caribbean have always said that a great travel agent will make a great cruise vacation experience even better, including, by the way, a DawgNation cruise there as well. And so Royal Caribbean said, hey, we know a great travel agent. Her name's Jessica Slater. She's terrific. Good friend, of course. And now she can be your good friend and getting you taken care of for everything you need for the DawgNation cruise coming up April 22nd through the 26th next spring, going to Perfect Day, Coco Cay, Nassau in the Bahamas, and all the great stuff there, including a whole bunch of fun DawgNation-themed events. RoyalDogs.com, that is the website, RoyalDogs.com for more on that. So CBS Sports has some new bowl predictions out for the upcoming season. Jerry Palm, who's been doing this, for what seems like 1,000 years, he's got his projections out, and you're not surprised to find out he's got Georgia, of course, in the college football playoff. But it's a reminder when you see these projections from Jerry Palm, y'all, this is one of those years in which the 2 semifinal games are really, really fun. Now, obviously, it was cool last year to play a playoff game in Atlanta, very convenient for a lot of Georgia fans, of course. But this year, it's really, to me, like when I think about the college football playoff, I think about the national semifinals being at the Rose Bowl and the Sugar Bowl, and that's where they are here this year. Now, I've been lucky to do a lot of things from a sporting standpoint in my life, very blessed in that regard. I don't think I've ever done anything like the Rose Bowl. That was such a good time, such a good time. And there's a part of me that would love the idea this year of kind of having that repeat experience and like doing that all over again. However, I also am a big believer. I think the Sugar Bowl is just a blast. And I've been to the last couple of Sugar Bowls when it was obviously more of a consolation prize for Georgia because it wished it was in the college football playoff. And listen, I still had fun in New Orleans because New Orleans is just sort of a fun place to be. And being there made me remember or be kind of a reminder of how cool it would be to play like the big game in New Orleans, the playoff game. I've always been really jealous of the Georgia fans who, and we've heard from some of these folks who would say, hey, I was in Indianapolis in 2021. That was the most, at the time, the most recent national championship for Georgia. And I was also back in New Orleans in January of 1981 at the end of the 1980 season. They saw those 2 national championships kind of bookended by the 40 years. And they'll tell the stories about being on Bourbon Street after that game that night and all that kind of stuff. And I've always been like really jealous of that. So as crazy as it might, it's not crazy. Different people may just think different things. But as easy as it would be to say, hey, give me a repeat of going to the Rose Bowl and doing all that all over again, my gosh, I'd love the idea of Georgia playing a playoff game in New Orleans. I just think that'd be an absolute blast. That's what Jerry Palm's got Georgia doing. Rematch against Ohio State, he says. There in the Sugar Bowl. If you care, he's got Michigan, Alabama in the Rose Bowl. So another guy who seems to love mighty Michigan here. That's Jerry Palm, CBSSports.com. His New Year's Six Bowls, by the way, he's got a rematch between Florida State and LSU in the Orange Bowl. That's, I guess, kind of interesting. And he's got Clemson, Texas in the Peach Bowl there as well, one of those other New Year's Six Bowls. Speaking of Texas, very impressive. Recruiting win for the Longhorns yesterday, bringing in 5-star edge rusher Colin Simmons. Now, here's what I'm going to tell you about this. I'm obviously not a fan of Texas. I've picked them to make the playoff this year. I told you before I didn't love that pick because I don't like being a part of sort of Texas is back bandwagon that almost always seems to derail at some point in time. And I realize that the certain obnoxious level of their fan base has created a scenario where not only have they been overrated year after year after year, so many folks around college football have taken great pleasure in them being overrated. I get all of that. I am a participant in that. I totally understand that. However, when you go out and get a guy like Simmons here right now, let me tell you what I think this potentially signals. I think this potentially signals the idea that Texas is getting more serious about football. I've told you before, there is just a lack of toughness that I think has kind of plagued the Big 12. I think it starts at the high school level. I am not anywhere near as big a fan of Texas high school football as some people are. You know, I think that Texas high school football has been one of the things because that state has really embraced a lot of the sort of spread concepts and things like that. You know, it's sort of all offense, no defense. And I think a lot of times these Big 12 teams have sort of been all offense, no defense. Even a place like Texas, I just don't think has been as tough defensively with its front seven, things like that, as it could have been in the past. You go back and look at a signing class from a year ago. You see things like, you know, 5-star quarterback, you know, Arch Manning. You see a lot of flash and dash. You know, you see, you know, running back like C.J. Baxter, you know, things like that. They did bring in Anthony Hill, a 5-star linebacker. But, you know, the sort of Texas idea of late has been the really good offensive player. And obviously Steve Sarkisian's an offensive-minded coach. But they're about to be in the SEC. You got to have balance on both sides of the ball. And I think the commitment of a guy like Simmons, assuming they can hold on to that commitment, I think signals that Texas, as they join the SEC, is getting ready to be a little bit more like the SEC, if that makes sense. They do have the resources. If they devote that to toughness and physicality, they can achieve that. And, you know, there's a chance that Steve Sarkisian, he's had a couple of shots here as a head coach. There's a chance that he's just more ready for this job right now than he was in the past. We're going to see some of that here this year as they try to march through a relatively weak and, you know, Big 12 for the final opportunity before they come into the SEC. Like, honestly, I'm very, very hesitant about any kind of thing that sort of sounds like Texas is back. Very, very hesitant about stuff like that. But I do think that Simmons' commitment yesterday is sort of a real move. I think that's a serious act, bringing in a guy like that. And I just, you know, kind of want to take a moment to mention that. And then finally, I meant to give this yesterday. It's not even that important. But Pete Rose, I just think it's funny. Pete Rose, the all-time hits leader in Major League Baseball, who no Alabama player has ever heard of. Also, I guess, to a lot of us, maybe most famous for taking tombstone pile drivers in back-to-back years at WrestleMania, was flown in to Tuscaloosa to speak to the Alabama football team because he's banned from baseball for betting. So Saban brought Rose in to, like, sort of speak to the team and you know, sort of address the issues related to gambling. And I guess part of me, I'm not even saying that's like a bad thing necessarily, but just sort of part of me wonders, does this work on the Alabama players at all? Like, who is this old man telling us not to gamble, and why should we care about him? Like, they don't know who Pete Rose is. Like, Pete Rose is just not that famous to somebody who's 18. So I'm not quite so sure this was like the really like big time speaker series get that Nick Saban thinks it is. But I guess, I don't know. I guess after what happened to Brad Bohannon's the guy you ought to bring in, the former Alabama baseball coach. He got fired, you know, 2 weeks ago for this, or at least, just a few days ago, seemingly, you know, for his involvement in gambling. They should have brought him in to speak. Pete Rose was, you know, decades ago by now. But either way, that's Nick Saban's attempt to let his players know that gambling is a very, very serious thing. So that's Saban's task there on that. He brings in Pete Rose to do it, and so I guess he gets credit for creativity, if nothing else. And we'll make that cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And we'll now let you hear, courtesy of a Kroger Fresh Take, from former Georgia quarterback Jake Fromm. And here on DawgNation Daily, time now for our Kroger Fresh Take. Welcome in former Georgia quarterback Jake Fromm to the show, as we typically do. Jake, thanks so much for your time. We appreciate you being here, one of our favorite parts of the week, and we're glad to have you as part of the show here today.
Yes, sir, Brandon, absolutely. Glad to be here.
So obviously one of the big things on your mind right now, and obviously a lot of Georgia fans also curious about this too, Washington Commanders play, preseason action Friday night tonight, I guess. As folks are listening to this, we're recording this on a Thursday, but when folks hear this, it'll be on a Friday. They're in Cleveland against the Cleveland Browns. How much fun is this for you, getting a chance to kind of be in an 11-on-11 situation? And for you and your Commanders teammates, I guess, how happy are you all about kind of playing somebody else besides yourselves for a change?
Oh, yeah, man, it's exciting. It's fun. Anytime you get an opportunity to go out and play ball, it's a blessing and a great opportunity, you know, kind of in front of you. So I know we're excited, and I know they're excited as well. But, man, just to go out and beat up on somebody else,
yeah,
you know, other than our teammates during camp, and just be exciting for everybody involved.
Do you get much of a sense of how, like, I guess the rotation's going to go in terms of, the time of game that'll belong to you, the time that'll belong to maybe Jacoby Brissett or, Max Howell, whatever else, Sam Howell. Do you get a sort of a sense of kind of like, kind of how some of that's going to go up, or is that more dictated by circumstances within the game?
Yeah, I mean, they give us a feel about how things are going to go, but, anytime you get in a game, things are always liable to change. And that's also, too, part of the evaluation process of being able to stay on your toes, stay locked into the game, and be able to play at a moment's notice. Maybe
a little bit of an on-field reunion with you and Nick Chubb, too. A lot of Georgia fans love the idea of that.
Oh, yeah. No, man. Being able to see Nick is great. Actually saw him at the end of the year last season when Cleveland came up here to play us. Man, Nick's doing great. Man, he is just such a great player and a great player for this league as well. And he's just going to continue to do great things as long as he keeps putting out these weightlifting videos of him in the off season, just moving an enormous amount of weight. Man, he's locked in and he's ready to go.
One of the things we've talked about in our show here a little bit this week is the fact that Georgia, one of the, I guess the majority of teams in college football this year are actually starting quarterbacks that came out of the transfer portal. Georgia, one of the teams that's obviously not doing that. In all three of the Georgia quarterbacks, Gunnar Stockton, Brock Vandagriff, the guy who many people think maybe eventually the starter, Carson Beck, they're all guys who've sort of stayed with the program. I guess I'm curious from you on a couple of notes here. What does it say about Georgia that quarterbacks have come here and chosen to stay? And for these players who have now spent, even in the case of Gunnar going into his second year, multiple years now, in excess of a year plus in this particular system, how potentially valuable is that for them that they're not, kind of trying to learn a new thing here? In other words, does Georgia have an advantage because of the fact they haven't had to use the transfer portal for quarterback the way that so many other teams in college football sort of have?
Yeah, I definitely think so. It speaks to Coach Smart. And the way they're able to recruit when they're going out and picking young men to be and join a part of their football team. They're getting good young men. And it speaks to Carson, it speaks to Brock, and it speaks to Gunnar as well for the kind of the men they are. Man, these guys are tough, they're gritty, and they love this team, they love the culture, and they want to be the guy at the University of Georgia, which is why they've hung with it as long as they have. And man, I just big props to those guys for sticking with it and battling it out. And it's going to be just exciting to kind of see what happens throughout the season as far as who gets it. But man, I really think it speaks to their character, their competitiveness, and the kind of guys that Coach Smart wants in the program.
And, of course, on Saturday, it's not one of those pivotal days as you get ready for one of those scrimmages, and a lot will be learned by the quarterbacks and the competition they go through there. I guess I'm curious, how much do you remember that about your own career when you go in there in a situation on a Saturday like that and you have to go out there inside the stadium, competing against a great defense like the Georgia defense? Like, how amped up would you get for one of those things, which is as close to the college level as we get to real football during the month of August? What was the feeling like that for you back then?
Oh, yeah, man. Scrimmages were a big deal. And there are a lot of give and take. There's ebbs and flows throughout the scrimmage. They are long. Man, I just remember, me and Charlie standing on the sideline towards the end of it, man, we have been out here for a while. Man, they're good. Man, they're tough. Really tough for those interior guys who just continue to grind, lean on each other. But man, so it's a great place to see guys play in a stadium, quote unquote, with the lights on, in front of a crowd a little bit. You can really get a mindset and a good idea of who you can trust.
Yeah, temperature is usually a nice, cool, comfortable 90-ish plus degrees too, which certainly adds to the mix there a little bit on that.
Long and brutally hot.
I want to talk about one more subject with you here, but let me remind folks it's our Kroger Fresh Take with Jake Fromm here on DawgNation Daily today. And don't forget, fun thing going on this month with our friends at Kroger Chef Jr., teaming up with the Atlanta Braves. The chili slaw dogs, you've heard about that as the menu item here this month. You and your kids get a chance to have a guided kids cooking experience. They learn how to make a great food item. They get some great kind of gifts to go along with that there as well, all kinds of kitchen paraphernalia, if you will. And in addition to that, this month, the Braves branded apron from our friends at Kroger, too. It's just $7 per child. So if you go to KrogerChefJr.com, you can find out more about that. That's KrogerChefJr.com. The word junior spelled out Junior. Make sure you check out KrogerChefJr.com for that this month with the Atlanta Braves and every month with our friends at Kroger with Kroger Chef Jr. So this week, Jake get a chance to hear from new Georgia offensive coordinator Mike Bobo, who's obviously not a new name or a new face for Georgia fans. They've certainly known a lot about him over the course of years. And I know this is a topic that we've addressed in the past, but what is your perspective on Bobo taking over here at the offensive coordinator spot in terms of having to fill big shoes because of the success of Todd Monken, but also kind of the ways in which you think it might be the same as what Coach Monken did in the past and how Mike Bobo might look to put his own stamp on this offense here going forward?
Yeah, I mean, let's not forget, Coach Bobo had a ton of success in his first go-around here, the offensive coordinator position. Put up a lot of really good numbers, high passing numbers as well. So he's had success before. And then, him with the experience of now being a head coach and then under Monken a little bit over the past year or two, man, I'm excited to see what he's going to be able to do. Have an unbelievable amount of talent. Brock Bowers, the receiving room, the offensive line unit, the running backs, and no shortage of good quarterbacks as well. So, man, it's kind of up to him, and let's just see just kind of how he wants to throw this thing around and what kind of weapons he wants to use and how he wants to use them.
Jake, it is always such a great pleasure to talk Georgia football with you. We'll be rooting for the Commanders tomorrow night, you in particular, when you get a chance to be out there in the football field, or I should say tonight because we're recording on a Thursday. People will hear this on a Friday, but you get the overall point here. So best of luck with all of that, and we'll look forward to talking to you very soon here as a part of a Kroger Fresh Take on DawgNation Daily presented by Kroger.
Yes, sir. Look forward to it, Brandon. Thank you.
All right, good stuff there from Jake Fromm. Tonight, we wish him well as he takes on the Cleveland Browns. Obviously, Jake trying to make that roster there. Sam Howell, the expected starter. There's Jacoby Brissett, who's in there too. And I think some of the debate around Washington sort of centers around, will they keep three quarterbacks on the active roster? Obviously, if they do, Jake Fromm has kind of emerged as he's not the only quarterback going through training camp, but he's sort of clearly emerged, I believe, as the number 3 there. And it's just simply a matter of getting a chance, show what he's all about in these preseason action and, have a chance to actually make that active roster for the Washington Commanders, which we're obviously rooting for him to be able to do. Really fun stuff there from Jake Fromm. And of course, speaking of fun and closing things out, we'll do so the collection of golden shoes for you here today. In fact, we'll go ahead and show the first one on the screen here. King Seabass sent this in. Really funny, using the hashtag golden shoe. It says, Mama said we can't watch Tennessee win a national championship because we don't have a VCR. That's right, King Seabass. You got to go all the way back to 1998 for that last Tennessee national championship. And folks, that is a long time ago. And Tennessee fans have been trying to sell you on feels like 98 ever since then. But what it feels like to me is a 98% chance of disappointment again this year for the Vols. Good stuff there, Seabass. We will give you a golden shoe for that. Next one, please, if you don't mind. Blake Seeger sends this in. So it's a Florida fan who's doing his, little streaming video in the car. And the Florida fan in this case says, I honestly believe that Florida is going to be a playoff team this year, and they're going to beat Georgia. Well, Blake shared that with me and says, check this man out. He's obviously laughing about that. And, of course, there is plenty to laugh about that if you are Blake Seegers or any other Georgia fan there in that particular case. So we'll give Blake a golden shoe there, too, because Florida fans being grandiose with their predictions, only to also meet and join Tennessee fans with their eventual disappointment. And that is kind of what the golden shoe is all about. And then finally there's this, almost like a cover band or someone who tries to sort of play the hits of, maybe that someone else sort of made famous. Pablo White had shared this with me. I think it's really funny. And I don't know if this came from I guess Barstool does a documentary on Deion Sanders or something like that. I guess this sort of came from that. But a coach, maybe that's what it came from, for Colorado was trying to fire up his troops. And in doing so, kind of took a page from Kirby Smart's playbook here. Let me see the tweet first, because what I had to do is I had to take Pablo's video and I had to kind of edit it because we're still sort of family friendly around here. So Pablo says that Kirby is providing inspiration for the coaches out there in Colorado. He says, but it just doesn't quite hit the same way as it does for Kirby Smart. Hashtag golden shoe. So that's what Pablo shared with me. Let me let you hear this and see if you notice the resemblance between what this Colorado coach is shouting out here compared to a very famous rant from Kirby Smart in the past. Take a listen to what Pablo shared with us.
I can't sleep at night because all I want to do is eat. I want you to 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 want this. Do you want it? Yes, sir. Do you want it? Yes, sir. Come on, man.
So I had to edit out the expletives there on that because we're still family friendly even during the Golden Shoe. But it's sort of like if you've ever been to a rock concert, the band plays somebody else's song. I have never seen a coach like literally almost word for word do like a complete rendition of Kirby Smart's famous "I Want You to Eat" speech that somehow got linked onto the internet many years ago. But listen, if it works, it works. Pablo says it doesn't quite hit the same as it does when Kirby Smart delivers it. That's probably true. I guess the best is always left in the hands of the original, but funny enough for a Golden Shoe indeed. And to everyone who submitted here to close out the week, we certainly appreciate that there as well. So I will see you tomorrow on Peachtree TV, not for high school football. We'll do that next week. And, boy, we get rolling next week. Corky Kell, Dave Hunter Classic. I've got 2 games on Wednesday. I've got 2 games on Friday. In between that, Matt Stewart will have you for a couple of games there on Thursday and the early afternoon game there on Friday. Matt and I both will be a part of the games at Mercedes-Benz Stadium on Saturday. And don't forget, that's going to be fun because it's the first time ever that instant replay has ever been used in Georgia high school football, and it's a precursor to the state championship. This is sort of a test run on that. For the Corky Kell Dave Hunter Classic, Mercedes-Benz Stadium next Saturday. So that's obviously really cool. But then tomorrow we're on Peachtree TV there as well for what we call the Sheriff's Cup. Last year it's something we kind of teamed up with Gwinnett Football League and the Gwinnett County Sheriff. This year, Atlanta area sheriff's departments from all around our metro area kind of getting involved on that. So we'll see you tomorrow, Peachtree TV, for all of that. Stay close to DawgNation. Updates on the UGA scrimmage. Lousy stinking Gators. Bad time coming their way 78 days from right now. That's our Gator Hater Countdown. We will see all of you back here again tomorrow. I should say Monday. DawgNation Daily presented by Kroger. We'll talk to you then. And on video, time now for the RS Andrews Cool Down. RS Andrews, the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised for the price that's promised. You can trust them on all of that today. I've actually got a fun lunch meeting coming up, so I can't go crazy long on the comments today. Sometimes meetings that pull me away from that are not quite so fun. I believe this one's actually going to be pretty fun. So I will get ready to enjoy all of that. And I'll take your comments here for a couple of minutes there as well before we kind of roll into the weekend. So hope you're doing good on that front. Wally Smith also wishing good weekends out to everybody else there for sure. Let's see what else. Brad Newsom wishing good weekends to folks there as well. Paul Moon and the subject of Jake Fromm. Yeah, I mean, a lot of this kind of comes down just to how, roster construction sort of goes. There's always been a kind of a weird thing with that. Like, I don't fully understand the NFL sort of like, game day active roster stuff and things like that. I'm just not as entrenched in the NFL. But, for a long time, teams had the third quarterback, but the third quarterback was not active on game day. In other words, college teams can play 3 quarterbacks by choice. But in the NFL, you could not play 3 quarterbacks unless you designated another quarterback as out. If there was an injury, then you could go play all 3. But let's say that you started a quarterback and he wasn't good, so you tried the next quarterback and he wasn't good. So you went back to the starter and he wasn't good again. So you're like, you know what? Just forget it. Bring in the third guy. In the NFL, you weren't allowed to do that for whatever reason. They had very strict roster game day active rules. I think some of that's changed a little bit, and I guess not every team keeps an active, a number 3 quarterback active on the roster. My understanding is from up there, now I'm not getting this from Jake, but my understanding is that if Jake isn't selected for the active roster, he would in all likelihood be obviously on the practice squad. It seems like Washington really likes him, but it's just a matter of kind of, what they want to do quarterback-wise. And I think the presence of Brissett is probably a little bit of an insurance policy against Sam Howell because Sam's still pretty young as a quarterback in his own right. And so Brissett, does have a little bit of experience, I guess. Thomas Tyson says the main problem in 2020 for the team on the field was the quarterback instability. And I'll remind you of some of the stuff that Carson Beck talked about on that. I mean, Carson Beck, when he did one of those podcast deals back in the spring, was incredibly candid about just how, 2020 was just a rotten year. And I do think the Georgia quarterback situation was a little bit of a mess that year. I think that's probably the case. Foster Moss says, I'm going to stone cold a case of those peach long drinks. So I've never done that where you slam the 2 cans together and you sort of pour it like that. Maybe a man in his 40s shouldn't be doing that. So that perhaps is why I haven't done it. But I've always sort of wanted to. Wham! And just do that deal right here. the truth is like, I always sort of thought I might have a celebration similar to that when like Georgia won the national championship. But like the problem is like, even when Georgia wins the national championship, I am still basically at work, which is a great thing. I mean, I love my job, but you know, that thing where you just get to really just celebrate and stand up on a bar somewhere or something like that. Like I'm still at work. Like I am on the clock, you know, in the aftermath of that national championship. So I would say like the one thing that has been a little, I don't want to say a bummer, that's not the right way to say it, but a little bit of a letdown maybe is that, and I love my job, but in the aftermath of these Georgia national championships, it's still kind of been a work day. I mean, you know, you're collecting and you know, we certainly had fun on the air and things like that, but you're collecting I don't know. It's just one of those deals where it's like, it's never quite been, because by the time you get out of the stadium, it's like 4 a.m. And like, that's the thing, like, you know, the working folk inside, you know, the broadcast, you know, areas and things like that, when these late games get over, it's late. And, especially in Indianapolis, it was really late. I guess out in the West Coast, Pacific time-wise, it wasn't quite as late. But still, I had to do the show at the same time, you know, the next morning. So it was same number of hours difference anyway. So I've never quite cut loose after the national championships the way that I'd kind of like to. I've never quite got to do the full-on Stone Cold celebration, but maybe one of these days I'll get to. Let's see what Frank Patterson brings up a good point, which maybe I could get forgiveness or something even bordering on permission from my bosses if the Stone Cold celebration also doubled as a product placement. Although the truth is, I'm not quite so sure that's how the finished long drink wants their product presented on air either. I'm not quite so sure that's the image they're looking to conjure up necessarily either. But you get the point. Jonathan Aaron says you can go back and look at the 49ers a year ago. Maybe some of these NFL teams carry 4 quarterbacks. Yeah, that's actually a pretty good point. They certainly went through plenty of them. Let's see what else. Alan Hampton says, want to see the Rams play in the preseason. Yeah, do they play tonight too? I probably should know this. I don't. Do they play? Because I want to see Stetson for sure. You know, there's just a few things I just think are interesting, like rooting for Jake, rooting for Stetson. I mean, I just think that's one of the most fun things about the preseason is seeing some of these guys that you kind of want to root for, and obviously for us, that'd be one of those guys that we do really want to root for. No doubt about that. Timmy Arbor says the Rams play on Saturday. Well, that's good news. By the way, how's the stream been today? Any reports on that from anybody? Mark Goodman says that he cut loose enough for both of us when it comes to that celebration. Yeah, listen, I'm glad to see it. And I enjoyed – it's one of those things I sort of enjoy it vicariously through all of you. And, like, the worst is when we have the DawgNation like our DawgNation Invasion tailgates and things like that. By the way, perhaps some good news coming on that front here very, very soon. But the worst is that because, honestly, of all the things about, like, working on a game day Saturday – that I kind of miss the most, I miss the pregame tailgate, man. I really do. I mean, that's the thing that I miss the most. I just love it. I don't know that I'll ever get to do that again. It's a weird thing to think that you may never get to do that again. Because obviously I hope to be working for the next 40 years. 35 years at least. So if I am, that'll probably, kind of take me out of commission there for that. But I miss the pregame tailgate some days. Oh, I just look so fun. And, we have these things, everybody around you is having a great time. And obviously as an ambassador for DawgNation, I want them to have fun at our events. But there's a certain extent to which, like, when you see other people, having fun at an event like this, you're like, I'd like to also be having fun at this event. Not that I'm not having fun doing what I'm doing, but you just want to be immersed in the culture, if you get my point. Barry Watkins, the subject of RR Thomas. Yeah, that's another one of those guys a little bit banged up the other day. So hoping to see good news there on that. Brandon Griffin on Dominic Lovett. Yeah, we had some good stuff in our practice report on Dominic the other day. And then Jake Fromm, really good stuff last Friday on Dominic Lovett there too. So good buzz around him here right now. Let's see what else. Miriam Corbin, William Camacho talking about the idea of Bowers to NYC. I like that. Miriam, for sure. Wayne Kirkland excited about Roderick Robinson. another guy to be pretty excited about, I believe. I think you're right about that. Joel Moody, I read this too. So Phil Mickelson allegedly, the most famous sports gambler of all time is a guy named Billy Walters. And Billy Walters got a brand new book out. And like there's a lot of buzz around this book because that man has lived a very interesting life. And one of the guys that Walters knew well was Phil Mickelson, who also has lived a very interesting life. And so according to this book, and as Joel Moody says, Mickelson has gambled over $1 billion in total bets. So like the I guess the sort of recollection of Walters is that Phil was doing like 9 bets a day. At one point, at least in one day in particular, he had 43 different bets on Major League Baseball, which to me, I always feel this way for like people who sort of bet the whole board on anything. Like, how do you keep up with it? Like, especially like this is especially true with like Super Bowl props. Of some of these guys that they'll have 87 different props, not 87, but you know what I'm saying, like a large number of props, and at a certain point, it sort of feels like the props are kind of like contradicting each other a little bit, and there's so much stuff going on in the game that you wouldn't know if you're up or down. And like to me, that would take the fun out of it. Like I would think the whole point, because goodness knows it's not a financial investment, typically speaking, for most people. The whole point of like the gambling to me is to have a rooting interest in the game. It just makes it. We like sports. To me, a little bit of a sprinkling of some money makes it more fun to watch the game, which to me is the purpose. But if you've got 43 bets on Major League Baseball, how do you even keep up with that? Like, I don't know. To me, that's a totally different thing, isn't it? I find that to be pretty bizarre. And then I guess the one thing that because I guess Walters and Phil Mickelson have kind of had a little bit of an on the outs a little bit. And so the one thing that Walters sort of dished on Phil is that Mickelson allegedly bet on a Ryder Cup that he was playing in, which obviously would seem to be a pretty big no-no. I believe that Phil has denied that. So there you go. Jason Thomas, I need to get better at checking my Facebook messages. I apologize for that. I have not always been great about that, but I will check that out, Jason. Thank you very much. I will. I apologize for not. It's one of those things. I'm just not really active on Facebook. Like I'll go through every few months and I'll accept my friend requests, and that's really all about I ever do. And I apologize because I think some of you have messaged me, and I need to get back to that, especially for something like this that Jason has shared, which is a really, really nice thing. So I do that. Jared Popham says, cheer up. I mean, you could get fired, and then you'd be able to attend every tailgate event. That's a good point. Yeah, listen, I love my job. I believe I have the best job in the world. And yet still there's that thing on game day where you're like, ooh, looks like right now everybody in the world's having a lot of fun. Kent Holcomb says that Pete Rose should be in the Baseball Hall of Fame. Strong stance there from him on that. Let me go to DawgNation.com. Then we got to get ready to go after that. PDT laughing about the some of the gambling stuff. By the way, if you ever go to Las Vegas, I don't know if he still does this or not. There was a time in my life, sort of pre-kids, many, many years ago, I used to go to Las Vegas fairly frequently. And, there's that memorabilia store I think it's in the Forum Shops there at Caesar's Palace. It's called Field of Dreams. There used to be a couple of Field of Dreams in Atlanta too. They're not here anymore, but there's still a Field of Dreams. At least there was the last time I was there, which is admittedly a good number of years ago. But there was that Field of Dreams memorabilia store in Las Vegas, and like Pete Rose was there almost every day. We were talking about signatures the other day. Like Pete Rose, one of those guys that he's got almost a perfect signature because he's practiced it so many times. I mean, I bet Pete Rose autographs aren't worth 10 cents just from the standpoint that he's just signed so many of them. He would go there and sign autographs for money every day. Every day he'd be there signing autographs. Literally, I don't think I ever went to Vegas and didn't see Pete Rose in there signing autographs. He's like a vendor, just signing his autographs. So if you ever want to see Pete Rose in person, it used to be you could go to Field of Dreams in Vegas and see him almost every day. Used to be able to do that. All right, a couple more comments. B-Max says, good stream issue today. DT echoing the same thing. You love that. Glad to hear that. Hopefully that stays the case. DT says, I worked as a sports writer in my late teens and early 20s and decided working Friday and Saturday nights almost all year was not for me. I've talked to a lot of young people about that, even back when I was young. And that's like the thing that you have to decide. If you want to work in sports, like the thing that you're going to have to make peace with is that your life is just going to be different than other people's other people's are. Your life's just going to be different. And one of the ways in which your life's going to be different is that you will be working a lot more on the weekends, like this time of year. And listen, I don't complain about this because, to use the great line from The Godfather, this is the business I've chosen. And I have just sort of made peace with that, like tomorrow I'm going to be doing my game on TV. Excited about that. Next week, going to be doing games, including throughout the weekend. Excited about that. That's just kind of the thing. Like if you're in your 20s, because like that's when I first got started into like media stuff, was back in my 20s. And, friends are going out on Friday night or they're staying out late. But on Saturday and Sunday, I knew I had my sort of media work I had to do. Back then it was sports radio. I knew I had that stuff I had to do, and that's what I wanted my life to be. And that was the commitment I made. And the thing of it is when you make that commitment, you don't know what it's going to turn into. And that's what kind of gets in your head sometimes. And there were plenty of times like back then when I would be saying, am I sure this is worth it? Am I sure this is worth it? Am I making a decision that 20 years from now I'm going to be glad that I did, or am I just giving away my 20s? In fact, I think I said that phrase a few times. I'm sort of giving away my 20s, and am I getting something in exchange for that? Well, as it turned out, I'm very thankful for how it worked out. I am. And I had some lucky breaks and things like that along the way that have sort of allowed me to kind of, not to say that I'm at the top of the industry necessarily. There are certainly plenty of people, many rungs of the ladder above me, of course. But the point is that I am now at a stage of my life where I am glad for what I did. But for the last 20 years of my life, weekends for me, most of the year, have felt probably a good bit different than weekends feel for kind of the average person. And that's just true. DT on the subject of some old Las Vegas stories. Yeah, there were a few of them, unfortunately. That was a very different version of BA, a very long time ago, DT. That's very funny. Joe Dog Simpson says, I'm eager to see Andrew Paul in the field, especially with Kirby saying that SEC Media Day, he's doing great. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a prospect worth paying attention to. I do. Now, how quickly do we see that? I guess that remains to be seen, but a prospect worth paying attention to for sure. Paul Moon says, I love sports and love watching sports, but I love my Fridays and Saturdays more. And that's I think it's important to know that about yourself one way or another in terms of, what it is you want out of life and what it is that, you require out of life. And I think making that trade-off and understanding all that, I think that's all really important. I mean, I'll tell you this. There was a time circa 2011, this was not related to this. It just happened to be at the same time my son was born. So circa 2011, actually it probably started in 2010 because I remember, the 2010 to me was a very weird year because I was going through a lot of weird stuff. Like I remember like 2010 kind of thinking, listen, I need to be a regular person that lives a regular life. I wanted my weekends back. I wanted to live sort of what I thought was like a regular life. I wanted to be a civilian again, so to speak. And I hated it. I was miserable. And at that point in time, I got a lot of clarity in my life from the standpoint of, okay, so I don't know how a lot of this stuff is going to work out. And when you're working kind of long hours for sometimes small pay and very, very thankless, you were like, am I making any kind of impact on the world at all? Like that plays in your mind a little bit. But what I determined was, I got to just be okay with this because somehow, some way, I'm kind of wired to sort of pursue this kind of work. And even if it doesn't result in the kind of like, rewards that I want it to result in, I just got to kind of be okay with pursuing that because not pursuing that was making me crazy and making the people around me probably pretty miserable. Mike Brown, I think, asking about Lynette Whitehead. Yeah, I haven't heard a ton about Whitehead. It seems like we've heard about everybody else. I mean, Dell McGee mentioned Savon Clark. Kirby mentioned Cash Jones, but I have not heard a ton about Lyneth Whitehead. That's a good question. Let's see what else. Kenneth Holt says something similar for me is that his two favorite things are hunting and college football, and they both take place during the fall. Yeah, I know a lot of people who deal with that frustration because, you know, you look forward to that, you know, that start of, is it bow season that starts in November? Like, or maybe, but whatever. Like you look forward to that getting here, and it obviously for a lot of people kind of takes you away from the, takes you away from the action. You wish those two things weren't happening at the exact same time. Like my version of that's kind of like, I sort of wish that Georgia football took place at a different time than the rest of college football. Like if I had my way, I'd enjoy all the Georgia games sort of like as a sole experience. And then separate from that, I'd also enjoy the other college football games there as well because I like watching them too. And it feels like sometimes you miss some of those because of how entrenched we all are in Georgia football. So I kind of get that version of that. I also have the image in my mind of somebody up there in the deer stand. They got the earbud in, listening to the old radio broadcast. I kind of like the idea of that still kind of being a thing. That's fun to me to think of. All right, boy, it's gotten late here, so let's get ready to go. Johnny Surf Dog says, I'm not worried about a three-peat. I just want to own the East one last time and beat the crap out of the Gators. Well, I am certainly thinking about the idea of go for 3-23. That's on my mind. But I do like the idea of, own the East has been a fun thing. And this is the last chance to own it here this year. I'm going to be, hopefully I'm not crying, but I'm going to be pretty emotional at the end of this year because a lot of stuff's changing. A lot of stuff's going to be different. And in a weird way, I'm going to kind of miss the SEC East. I may be a little emotional about that. BA's Ty Stone Cold Style says, going back to what we talked about earlier, says Kirby does not get mad over spilt milk. He only cleans it up, i.e. in recruiting. I think you're right about that. Really good stuff. Kevin Cook, good weekend to you there as well. Thanks for sharing some nice words for everybody here, and we wish you a good weekend too. David West wants to get down to Athens soon, says I haven't been since G-Day in 2016 when Kirby Smart became coach. He says I work on Saturdays, which is a bit of a bummer. Yeah, that's the other thing too, is people have work responsibilities sometimes that kind of takes them away from being able to enjoy college football as much as they want to. So, David, we do hope you get a chance to enjoy that soon. Keith Vold says, I love listening to Munson on the radio even when I was at the game. Yeah, I love that image. Back then it was like the big headset radios, like kind of like almost like the studio headphones like I'm wearing. And, I used to try to do that sometimes myself, and it was never all that comfortable for me for whatever reason to wear like the headset radio. I would have a hard time kind of getting comfortable, I think because I was just sort of a fidgety kid. And so maybe I could never quite get comfortable doing that just because I couldn't, I just sort of fidget too much. But, if you ever go to a NASCAR race too, like you listen to the scanner in your ears, which is obviously kind of mutes some of the loud engine noise, but also gives you a way to kind of follow the race. That's a very big thing in NASCAR. And I used to love to like look across the stadium and you'd see all the guys, wearing their headset radios. That is one of my big images from college football growing up. The presence of so many of those headset radios. I don't know how many of those you see anymore. But I used to love that image. Used to love to see that. In fact, when Eli Manning was at Ole Miss, and they'd show Archie Manning in the stands, Eli's dad, of course. If you ever see some of these old games on ESPN Classic or something, you may notice this. Like he would always have like the Ole Miss cap on, and he'd have the headset radio on too, which to me was just like this great old school image of just like college football from the era that I grew up in. And I do love the earpiece radios, man. I love that. That's a really cool image. Really cool image. All right, good stuff. Thanks for being here, y'all. Enjoy the weekend. Dog Nation's got you covered for the scrimmage tomorrow. That'll be good. And I'll see you back here Monday, and we'll kind of follow all of this as we roll on towards the start of the Go for 3 in 23 campaign. So thanks for being here for our R.S. Andrews Cool Down. Y'all find R.S. Andrews online for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They'll show up on time. They'll do the work that's promised, the price that's promised. You can trust them on all of that. And we will see you back here Monday for our R.S. Andrews Cool Down at the end of the show. And then Dog Nation.